Mark, a talented black chef with a tough past, steps into a high-end restaurant with a dream, but faces cold rejection and sabotage. Pushed to the edge, he takes one last step to prove his worth. Mark, a 40-year-old man with calm confidence in his eyes, pulls up to a high-end restaurant surrounded by lush greenery and elegant lanterns. The evening light casts a soft glow on the building, with its name displayed in gold letters on the facade. Known across the area, this restaurant is celebrated for its sophisticated cuisine and reputation, acknowledged by almost every critic as one of the finest in the region. Here, flawless service and the traditions of haute cuisine are highly valued. For Mark, this is more than a job. It's a step he's been working toward all his life. Coming from a small town, he always dreamed of making it in an elite establishment, proving his culinary skills were as good as those of the recognized masters. His passion for cooking started in his grandmother's small kitchen, where he learned to turn simple ingredients into culinary works of art. Now, after years of hard work, study, and experience in various restaurants, he's finally earned the opportunity to be the head chef at such a prestigious kitchen. Mark approaches the restaurant's main door, holding a leather folder with the menu plans he's been working on for ages. Taking a deep breath, he pushes open the door and steps inside. The lobby is filled with coffee and fine perfume, creating an ambience of luxury. Just as he moves toward the host's desk, a cold voice halts him. Standing before him is Peter, the manager, a young man with a perfect side part and a smile that seems more mask than greeting. Peter's gaze scans Mark's smart suit, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, as if he hadn't expected him to have legitimate business here. "Excuse me, sir, are you sure you're at the correct address?" Peter asks, with exaggerated politeness, as if subtly putting Mark in his place. "Our restaurant serves guests by reservation only." Mark raises an eyebrow, maintaining a polite smile, and introduces himself as the newly appointed head chef. Yet Peter looks at him as though it's a misunderstanding. "I understand you may have an arrangement," Peter says icily, as though Mark were a passerby. "However, our restaurant follows strict protocol. I must ask you to leave if you don't have a reservation." Without checking with management, Peter adjusts his cuffs, showing clear disdain and signaling that he considers Mark an unworthy outsider. Mark stands aside, arms crossed, observing as Peter greets each new guest with exaggerated respect. While elegantly dressed couples pass by, Peter, all smiles, escorts them into the dining room. Each time he glances at Mark, his eyes reveal barely concealed contempt. Mark senses the stares from other staff members, waiters, bartenders at the bar. They exchange looks, whisper among themselves, casting him cautious, appraising glances. Though Mark is used to such reactions, he feels a bit uncomfortable under the scrutiny, as though he's an intruder disrupting the delicate balance of this closed circle. After about 15 minutes by the entrance, he glances at his watch, tempted to simply leave. Even this initial meeting, his first official day, feels like a trial. But suddenly, a tall man with a graying hairline in a gray suit appears at the end of the room. It's Christopher, the restaurant manager, striding confidently toward the desk. Christopher quickly assesses the situation, recognizing Mark and connecting the dots. His face briefly registers surprise, even a touch of embarrassment. Realizing this must be their new head chef, he gives Mark a subtle nod and turns to Peter with a hint of reproach in his eyes. "Peter, allow me," he says, inviting Mark to follow him. Peter's polite demeanor falters for a second, replaced by frustration and disappointment. He quickly regains his composure, tightens his lips, and resumes his formal posture. But the looks on the other staff members' faces speak of dissatisfaction with Mark's presence. Christopher invites Mark into his office, apologizing for the misunderstanding with slight discomfort. As they walk through the hall, Mark notices the lingering stares from waitstaff and bartenders, their faces showing faint irritation and unease. Mark's first day starts early, in the quiet of the kitchen. Putting on his new chef's jacket, he surveys the familiar equipment and spice-lined shelves with a smile. Although used to high-pressure kitchens, here in this elite restaurant, he feels excitement mixed with responsibility, as if years of experience led him to this moment. His precise actions draw the attention of junior chefs, who shift from skepticism to admiration as they witness his polished moves. However, discontent stirs. Peter, monitoring Mark closely, seizes moments to slip in snide remarks. When Mark suggests new plating techniques, Peter responds with chilly politeness, creating a clear barrier. Following Peter's disapproval, other staff members start doubting Mark's decisions, murmuring about long-established traditions. Tension arises when Mark proposes a minor change to a signature dish, facing open contradiction and passive resistance. Despite these challenges, Mark maintains his professionalism, choosing actions over arguments. He lets his dishes speak, smiling quietly when he notices staff tasting his sauces or observing his plating with curiosity. Peter quietly begins his sabotage, using his position and connections to interfere with Mark's ingredient orders. He substitutes fresh produce with lower quality ones, sometimes delivering slightly wilted greens or near-expired meat. When Mark questions it, Peter insists it's restaurant policy and attributes it to specific suppliers. Peter also delays kitchen orders by arranging extra checks under the pretense of maintaining standards, though it's clearly to hinder Mark. Once, frost-damaged fruit arrives, risking dish textures. Peter's sarcastic inquiry, "Can the new chef handle this?" only reinforces the challenges. Mark sees through Peter's tactics but stays composed. Rather than argue, he adapts his recipes to fit available ingredients. Wilted greens become part of sauces, and overripe fruits turn into rich purees for desserts. Each dish remains remarkable, garnering applause from guests who notice the subtle enhancements. The junior staff begins noticing Mark's resilience. One sous chef, Eric, approaches him, curious about Mark's strategies. Mark shares advice, explaining the importance of adaptability. His mentorship resonates not only with Eric, but also with other junior chefs, who start viewing him as a mentor, learning both culinary skills and resilience. Christopher, the restaurant's manager, noticed the tense atmosphere that had been building up in the kitchen. He saw it in the way staff exchanged looks, their curt responses, and the almost palpable tension in the air, as if the kitchen had become a powder keg, ready to blow at any moment. Realizing this could impact the restaurant's reputation, Christopher decided to step in. He arranged a meeting with Mark and Peter to set things straight. At the appointed time, the three met in Christopher's small but cozy office, its walls adorned with awards and photos of famed critics who had praised the restaurant's cuisine. Peter, with a stony expression, sat across from Mark, who remained composed and calm, though inwardly he sensed that this would not be an easy conversation. Christopher opened the conversation diplomatically, asking how Mark was adjusting and how he was managing with the team. Mark, understanding that this talk likely stemmed from Peter's behavior, calmly replied that he was trying to adapt to the new environment, and that while he faced some difficulties, he continued to maintain high standards. He mentioned his attempts to foster teamwork, hinting subtly at the ongoing resistance and even sabotage. Catching this remark, Peter grew animated, with a hint of concealed disdain in his voice. "Christopher, it seems to me that the issue here is that our new chef doesn't fully understand our standards. I just want to say, a restaurant like this demands specific skills." He emphasized the last word, casting a quick glance at Mark. "Maybe he can cook, but we have our traditions, our clientele. I'm not sure Mr. Mark is cut out for this." Mark kept his cool, resisting the provocation, though he felt Peter's words and underlying message, that Mark wasn't cut out for this elite restaurant. Seeing the tension, Christopher nodded thoughtfully and addressed Mark. "Mark, you've done impressive work with the dishes you've presented to our guests. Many of them were genuinely impressed. But as you can see, our kitchen is a place with established traditions. Sometimes the team needs time to adjust to new methods and style." Mark understood the hint, but stayed firm, nodding calmly. He replied, "I completely understand, Christopher, that traditions matter here, and I respect that. But I also believe that a kitchen can grow and evolve if we're not afraid of change. I'm ready to work and adapt, but I would like my efforts to be recognized for what they are." Peter quickly interjected, "But Christopher, you see, it's not just about style or methods. We need to be sure everyone understands our approach to fine dining, that everyone can uphold the establishment's reputation. And with that attitude," he glanced again at Mark, "I'm not sure that's possible." Christopher listened to them both with an impassive face, weighing each man carefully. He saw determination and resilience in Mark, but he also recognized that Peter was set on his tactics and was unlikely to change his attitude. With a sigh, Christopher turned to Mark with one final suggestion. "Mark, I'm pleased to see you're enthusiastic and committed to success, but you have a choice. You can keep working, despite these challenges, or if you feel the atmosphere has become unbearable, you always have the option to leave. I'll support whatever you decide, but I hope you'll stay and continue to show us what you can do." To Mark, these words felt like both quiet encouragement and a test. He thanked Christopher for his honesty and agreed to stay, determined to prove his skills and overcome every obstacle, no matter how challenging it might be. For Mark, the upcoming tasting evening would be a real test. It was his chance not only to showcase his talent, but possibly secure his place at the restaurant. He had the opportunity to prove that his dishes could surprise and delight even the most discerning critics and demanding guests. Preparation was in full swing, and the kitchen buzzed with anticipation as Mark meticulously planned every detail, from flavor combinations to each plate's presentation. Meanwhile, Peter watched Mark with a stony expression. He knew tonight could be a triumph for the new chef and was determined to prevent that. Alongside a few like-minded colleagues, he hatched a plan to orchestrate a mishap in the kitchen. The idea was simple: don't let Mark shine. Peter decided to exploit the inevitable chaos of a high-profile event and create situations so that by the time the dishes were served, they would either be ruined or not ready at all. Before the evening began, Peter quietly discussed his plan with a few staff members. One would forget an essential ingredient on the order list, while another would delay the delivery of key serving dishes, so that, come showtime, Mark would find himself short of resources. They were confident this trick would guarantee the chef's failure, knowing that in a high-stress, short-on-time scenario, even the most seasoned chef might slip up. But Mark, attuned to the atmosphere around him, sensed something off. He couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on. Essential items were delayed. Certain spices didn't show up on the shelves as expected. He noticed a few junior chefs exchanging uneasy glances and shifting nervously when he asked questions. His suspicions grew when someone accidentally dropped a tray with important ingredients, and Mark realized this was no coincidence. Mark decided to approach things differently. Unlike others, he didn't panic or accuse anyone outright. Instead, he swiftly re-evaluated the menu and adjusted several key elements based on what was available. Using his culinary expertise and experience, he improvised on the fly. While the other chefs looked on bewildered, Mark confidently directed the team with clear and concise instructions. He chose new spices, swapped ingredients, and even altered the presentation of dishes to give them freshness and originality. When the tasting began, Mark's dishes were served to the guests. He focused on simplicity and natural flavors, adding surprising notes from his forced changes. The result was unconventional, but precisely what captivated the critics' attention. In each dish they sensed a unique style and unexpected combinations that left a lasting impression. The critics and guests were entranced. Some began whispering that the restaurant had found a new talented chef, bringing unexpected accents to classical cuisine. Peter, meanwhile, stood aside, watching his plan crumble. His scheme, instead of leading to Mark's failure, had showcased the chef's strengths and improvisational skills. When the evening ended, guests thanked Mark for the outstanding dishes and asked him about his inspiration. He smiled, realizing that Peter's tricks and schemes hadn't broken him. The dinner with critics and VIP guests began, and the restaurant was filled with an air of elegance and anticipation. At the tables sat influential people, well-known critics, owners of other restaurants, and regular patrons. Waiters skillfully served the first courses, and as soon as forks touched plates, approving murmurs spread through the room. The guests were delighted. Every bite was a revelation of flavor depth, carefully chosen ingredients, and subtle aromas. Mark had achieved the perfect balance, despite the obstacles Peter had set in his way. The critics animatedly discussed each dish, analyzing the spice's subtle nuances, the exact meat texture, and the unexpected ingredient pairings. One of them noted that tonight's dinner had a distinctive presentation, something fresh and daring, yet highly professional. They shared impressions. wondering where the new chef had found such boldness in flavor combinations, and noted that the restaurant seemed to have acquired a new spirit. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the kitchen remained tense. Many employees, observing the guests' reactions, began to realize that Mark was no ordinary chef. He was displaying a level of skill not every chef could match. His confidence, resilience, and professionalism did not go unnoticed. Even those who had once been skeptical of his style now saw him as a true chef rather than just a temporary hire. Peter, watching all this, began to lose patience. He saw how each positive review from the critics, each guest's smile, only amplified respect for Mark. Unable to contain his frustration, Peter finally decided to speak up. Midway through the main course service, he approached Mark, drawing the attention of several staff members and guests who could see what was happening in the kitchen. With disdain in his voice, he loudly declared, "You might have succeeded tonight, Mark, but I have to say, your approach doesn't meet our standards. This is all temporary, you understand? You won't last a week with that attitude. You're not a professional." In the restaurant, where a pleasant hum of conversation and clinking glasses had filled the air, a hush fell. A few guests, hearing Peter's words, turned to the kitchen, curious to understand what was happening. Peter's outburst brought more attention to Mark than he could have anticipated, and now all eyes were on him. Mark, staying calm, nodded and smiled slightly, showing that he would not rise to the bait. He addressed the critics and VIP guests watching him. "For me, it's always been important to create dishes that are not only delicious, but evoke emotions. Each ingredient, each detail in these dishes was chosen to tell a story," he said calmly, meeting their gazes confidently. Mark's words struck a chord. The critics nodded in approval, understanding they were not simply in the presence of a chef, but a craftsman who poured his soul into his work. They began to ask questions, curious about his approach and techniques. Every response Mark gave was assured, sincere, and professional. With each answer, he shared a world where gastronomy was an art capable of expressing feelings, emotions, and even memories. The guests, sensing his confidence and passion, grew more interested in the chef who had brought something new to the restaurant. Peter, realizing his attempt at public humiliation had failed, merely clenched his jaw and left, muttering under his breath. His face expressed helplessness and frustration. His sabotage and accusations of unprofessionalism had only strengthened the admiration and respect for Mark. When the dinner ended, many guests and critics approached Mark to personally thank him for the outstanding dishes. They expressed their admiration for his talent and asked when they could once again sample his cuisine. For Mark, this evening marked a true triumph, solidifying his position and proving to everyone that he belonged there in every sense. As the evening reached its peak, Mark took advantage of the moment to share with the guests what this night truly meant to him and how challenging his journey to success had been. Bowing his head slightly in gratitude, he addressed the room, and his voice carried a deep sincerity and strength that caused everyone present to fall silent and listen intently. "To me, tonight is more than just a dinner," he began, his voice resonant and moving. "This is a step toward a dream, toward a goal I've pursued my entire life. I grew up in a small town where opportunities seemed limited, where there were no fine restaurants or chances for major success. But I always had a passion, cooking, and it's that passion that kept me moving forward, despite every obstacle." The guests, many of whom were used to seeing chefs as strictly professional and somewhat distant, listened with keen interest. They realized that Mark was speaking not only about food, but about the spirit that drives a person to overcome obstacles and chase their dreams. "The journey hasn't been easy," Mark continued, his gaze passing over the faces of guests, critics, and staff members, as if he wanted each of them to feel his words. "Every step forward was a test, as there were always those who doubted I could ever become a chef just because I looked different or didn't fit into the usual stereotypes. But I studied, I worked, I stumbled, and got back up again and again, knowing that one day my efforts would pay off." Many guests exchanged glances, moved by his words. The emotional atmosphere in the room intensified, and some staff members began to view Mark differently too. Their expressions were no longer skeptical, but attentive, showing respect for his perseverance and resilience. Waiters, cooks, and even Peter, standing off to the side, watched in silence as Mark spoke, his words peeling away the facade of a regular chef and revealing a strong, genuine person. Mark paused briefly, took a deep breath, and continued, now addressing everyone in the room directly. "In this room are people from all walks of life," he said with a gentle smile. "I know that each of us has our own unique path, our own challenges and victories. I ask you, no matter how difficult your days may be or how different we look or our backgrounds may seem, to remember that we have more in common than it appears. Every person deserves an equal chance to prove themselves. There's strength in equality, and we don't need to look at skin color to understand what a person does or who they truly are." His words resonated deeply. Guests and staff alike looked at him with admiration and understanding, seeing not just a chef, but a person with a deep inner strength and a commitment to fairness. One of the critics, known for his directness, raised his glass and spoke with respect. "To Mark, for your resilience and strength. Your dishes tonight were exceptional, but your heart is what truly makes them special." Inspired by the critic's words, the guests raised their glasses in support of the toast. Applause filled the room, with some shouting words of encouragement, while others simply nodded with a smile, feeling the power of the moment. Mark noticed that even among the staff, faces softened, and some even smiled, recognizing him not only as their chef, but as a leader and a person whose commitment to equality deserved respect. This evening changed many things. It became the beginning of a new era, not only for Mark, but for the entire restaurant. The staff realized they were not simply working under a talented person, but a genuine leader ready to inspire and support others, despite any obstacles. Peter stood by the wall, observing the events with barely concealed shock. Every word of gratitude, every applause, and every admiring look directed toward Mark felt like a cold splash of reality. He had always seen Mark as an outsider, someone who didn't fit in an elite restaurant. But now he saw before him not just a chef, but someone whom people recognized as a leader. For Peter, this was like a blow to his pride and prejudices, but inside, he began to realize he had been wrong. Christopher, who had been watching the scene carefully, noticed the expression on Peter's face. He approached him and, leaning slightly closer, said quietly, "Peter, I think it's time for you to take a step back. It's time to admit your mistakes. This isn't about the restaurant's reputation. It's about your respect for someone who's proven his worth and dedication. Mark has earned recognition, and now it's your turn to acknowledge that." Peter looked at Christopher, sensing the honesty and sincerity expected of him. His mind flashed with memories of all the sabotage attempts and the hurtful words he had directed at Mark. Internally, he wrestled with himself, realizing that Mark had been right, though pride still held him back. But under Christopher's intense gaze and among colleagues who no longer looked to him as a leader, he knew he had no choice. Swallowing his pride, he approached Mark, while the staff held their breath, watching the two of them. "Mark," Peter began hesitantly, clearly struggling to find the right words. I was wrong. I made a mistake by not believing in you or your abilities. You've shown us all that talent and perseverance are what matter most. I'm sorry for what I did." Mark listened in silence, his face calm and composed. He didn't respond immediately, but then nodded slightly. "I accept your apology, Peter," he said calmly. "I hope this helps you understand that work in the kitchen isn't just about professionalism. It's also about support and respect for one another." Peter, lowering his head slightly, understood that Mark's words carried a deeper meaning and felt the weight of his own mistakes. Under the scrutiny of the team, who now looked at him with disappointment and mistrust, he decided to leave the restaurant. His departure marked a new beginning for the establishment, not with bitterness or conflict, but with forgiveness and the realization that only those truly passionate about their work belonged in the kitchen. After Peter's departure, the kitchen's atmosphere noticeably changed. Mark, now recognized as the sole head chef, became not only the main culinary figure, but an inspiration for the entire staff. He shared his knowledge and techniques with junior chefs, readily answered questions, and supported each person's ideas. The kitchen no longer harbored fear or prejudice, only friendly support and mutual respect. Under his leadership, the restaurant gained a renewed reputation. Guests, hearing about the new chef's talent and distinctive approach, came not only for a meal, but for a unique dining experience. Mark's dishes became the restaurant's signature, and critics wrote rave reviews, emphasizing that his cooking was something far more than mere restaurant fare. It was a blend of flavors, styles, and cultures that Mark boldly incorporated into his recipes, impressing even the most discerning guests. The restaurant became a place where talent thrived, regardless of background or appearance. Mark, who had once faced bias himself, now showed respect to every new staff member, giving young chefs a chance to shine while learning from one another. It became a place where quality, respect, and a passion for culinary arts stood as the central pillars. In the end, under Mark's guidance, the restaurant became a symbol of a new era, a place where prejudice was left at the door, and every individual and their unique talents were truly valued above all.